Hello and welcome, and thank you for joining me. In this project, I imagine what might unfold if figures and beings from Western culture, across history, mythology, and fiction encountered the Buddha. Each meeting is a creative journey, exploring how their unique perspectives, beliefs, values, and life experiences might intersect with the Buddha's teachings. It's an invitation to bridge diverse traditions and stories. This diverse episode of figures spanning history, mythology, and fiction offers a creative lens to connect human experiences, values, and challenges with timeless teachings, fostering fresh insights across cultures and disciplines. Today, we'll be exploring a fascinating collection of individuals, from pioneers in mental health, influential creators, to legendary heroes of myth, offering fresh insights into their worlds and the timeless wisdom of the Buddha. So, I want to introduce you to something called my fourfold analysis. In the timeless clearing where people from all paths to converse with the Buddha, each dialogue unfolds with pretty profound simplicity. Yet, the wisdom exchange does not end with the direct conversation between one and one. Nearby, a diverse group of listeners, scholars, celebrities, military, politicians, or even shop traders and meditative people reflect on what has been said. They do not always agree, for their perspectives vary very widely, shaped by their own experiences and understanding. After each encounter, the group engages in a fourfold analysis of the dialogue. One offers an unhealthy criticism, their view marred by misunderstanding or bias. Another, second, responds toxically, allowing their emotions or assumptions to twist the truth into a source of division. The third one presents a healthy critique, thoughtful, constructive, aimed at deepening understanding. Finally, the fourth one, someone shares a healthy response, bridging perspectives and seeking harmony between different views. This reflective process, inspired by the Buddha's own emphasis on wise contemplation, provides a balanced exploration of the dialogue. It helps illuminate not only the truths shared, but also the human tendencies that color how we interpret and respond to wisdom. As the scene unfolds, these diverse voices guide us, offering a rich understanding of the interplay between insight and human nature. Here's our guest who are waiting audience with the Buddha. Here's the episode. Emil Kraepelin, German psychiatrist, pioneer of mental illness classification. Richard Noll, psychiatrist and Jung critic. William C. Menninger, pioneer of modern psychiatric diagnostics. Later on, we'll have Gollum, the tragic Lord of the Rings character, then along together with Jason from Jason and the Argonauts, mythical Greek hero, seeker of the Golden Fleece. Van Morrison, singer, songwriter, romantic, poetic musician. Ajax, mythical Greek soldier, famous for strength and tragedy. Hercules, mythical Greek hero, past 12 tasks. Homer, ancient Greek storyteller, who wrote epic adventure poems. Demeter, the Greek goddess of agriculture. Saint Michael, archangel, defender against evil. Emil Kraepelin versus the Buddha, the founder of psychiatry versus the teacher of the unconditioned mind. Emil Kraepelin, 1856 to 1926, the pioneering German psychiatrist, is often regarded as the founder of modern scientific psychiatry. He categorized mental illnesses, laying the groundwork for diagnosis like schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. His focus on biology and heredity transformed psychiatry from abstract theories into a medical science. However, his approach sometimes overlooked environmental and existential factors. Kraepelin sought to understand mental illness scientifically, believing that understanding the brain would lead to treatments. In contrast, the Buddha taught that liberation arises from transcending categorization. The Buddha might say, the mind cannot be freed by definitions alone. Freedom arises when craving, aversion, and ignorance are understood and abandoned, while Kraepelin relied on observation and data. The Buddha would counter that the mind cannot be confined to what is observed. He might gesture to the sky, saying, as a bird cannot be bound by the outlines of its flight, so too the mind is free when it lets go of clinging. Kraepelin's systematic approach represents humanity's desire for structure, while the Buddha's wisdom cautions that structure alone may not bring liberation. The Buddha might tell the story of the man who named each crack in his house, but it was only when he fixed the foundations that the house stood firm. Similarly, the Buddha might ask, do names and labels cure, or merely point the way to understanding? The Buddha's teachings, as found in the Satipatthana Sutta, focused on direct observation of the mind, encouraging the wise to see the arising and passing of mental states without clinging to them. This contrasts with Kraepelin's diagnostic categories. After the exchange between the Buddha and Kraepelin, the small group of observers gathered to discuss the dialogue. Their reactions varied, reflecting a spectrum of engagement from impulsive criticism to thoughtful reflection. A younger member of the group expressed frustration, saying, this metaphor about the mind being like a bird in the sky is just irresponsible. Kraepelin dedicated his life to creating structure, and now the Buddha just throws it aside, as if it's meaningless. This critique, though passionate, was ultimately unhealthy. It insulted the Buddha's intent by dismissing his metaphor without engaging with its underlying wisdom. It also perpetuated division between structure and freedom without considering their interplay, and fostering arrogance by disregarding a teaching with centuries of transformative impact. Another observer, a staunch supporter of Kraepelin, added with venom, This kind of vague mysticism undermines real progress. Kraepelin gave us tools to help people, while this talk of birds and skies sounds like something from a cult. This response was toxic. It insulted the Buddha, reducing his profound insights to vague mysticism. It also fueled unnecessary antagonism between science and spirituality, portraying them as incompatible. And finally, it fostered arrogance by dismissing the Buddha's contributions, disregarding their historical and philosophical significance. In contrast, an older scholar offered a more measured response. Kraepelin's work laid the foundation for understanding mental health. Yet, the Buddha's perspective raises a crucial point. Can structure alone free the mind, or does true liberation require going beyond it? Perhaps Kraepelin's categories point to the cracks in the foundation, while the Buddha suggests how to address them. This critique was healthy, as it engaged deeply with both viewpoints. It acknowledged Kraepelin's contributions while opening the door to consider the Buddha's emphasis on transcending attachment to categories. It avoided division and supported integration. Finally, a contemporary Westerner attuned to both disciplines shared her reflections. Kraepelin's methods bring clarity to a chaotic field, offering pathways to treatment. The Buddha's teachings, meanwhile, remind us not to let these pathways become prisons. Both are striving to alleviate suffering, but approach it from different angles. Perhaps the real insight lies in balancing these perspectives. This response was the healthiest of the group. It acknowledged the strengths of both Kraepelin and the Buddha's approaches, avoiding polarization. It promoted curiosity over uncertainty and invited a dialogue that bridged science and spirituality. At this point, a younger man, Richard Noll, author of The Aryan Christ and a critic of Carl Jung, left the group and joined Kraepelin and the Buddha under the tree. The psychiatrist and critic versus the teacher of the mind's liberation. Richard Noll, a psychiatrist and critic of Carl Jung's legacy, explored the psychological constructs of spirituality, cautioning against the dangers of systems that manipulate the mind. He argued that the mind can be manipulated by those who claim knowledge of the ineffable. The Buddha, while acknowledging the power of thought, taught the path beyond manipulation. The mind is bound by ignorance, not systems. Freedom arises when one sees through constructs to the unconditioned truth. Noll's critical approach dissected the cultural impact of psychological systems, warning against blind belief. The Buddha, too, advised against blind faith, offering a middle way. Do not believe blindly, nor reject rashly. Investigate wisely and see the truth for yourself. If Noll questioned, are systems inherently dangerous? The Buddha might respond with a metaphor. A system is like a raft. It helps you cross, but must be abandoned once you've reached the other shore. while Noll's skepticism often focused on deconstructing systems. The Buddha cautioned against clinging to either belief or critique. Critique sharpens the mind, but binds it when clung to. True peace arises when the mind lets go of all attachment to views. The Buddha revealed a freedom beyond both belief and skepticism. Liberation is beyond all views, beyond both skepticism and faith. The Buddha's Kalama Sutta underscores the importance of personal investigation. Do not go by reports, traditions, or hearsay. When you see for yourself that something leads to harm, abandon it. When you see it leads to peace, embrace it. This comparison highlights Noll's analytical approach to systems, contrasted with the Buddha's teaching of discernment and liberation beyond all constructs. After the dialogue between Noll and the Buddha, the group of observers gathered beneath the banyan tree to share their thoughts. The younger participant, furrowing his brows, said, Noll's point about the manipulation of the mind by systems is important, but the Buddha's metaphor of the raft seems dismissive. It doesn't address the danger of charismatic leaders exploiting belief systems. While earnest, his critique failed to engage with the Buddha's deeper wisdom, risking division between Noll's skepticism and the Buddha's liberating insights. It clung to direct critique as the only solution, overlooking the nuance of the Buddha's middle way. Another observer, with a sharp tone, added, This is the problem with spiritual teachings. They hide behind metaphors instead of confronting real dangers. This toxic response insulted the Buddha's wisdom, misrepresented it as evasive. It fostered division between science and spirituality, reducing the Buddha's teachings to mere defensiveness, while ignoring the Buddha's emphasis on personal discernment. An older woman, sitting on a woven mat, offered a more balanced perspective. Noll's critique is valid. It challenges blind faith and the allure of charisma. Yet, the Buddha's raft metaphor teaches us that systems, whether psychological or spiritual, can guide us, but we must not cling to them. The true danger lies in attachment to any system, belief, or critique. This healthy response acknowledged the strengths of both Noll's and the Buddha's teachings on non-attachment, fostering dialogue and a shared concern for liberation. A quiet monk, seated on the edge of the group, spoke up. Noll's skepticism highlights the dangers of systems, but the Buddha shows a way beyond both clinging and critique. It's not about rejecting systems outright or defending them. It's about investigating and letting go when they no longer serve. Isn't that the true balance? Noll and the Buddha may not be as far apart as they seem. This response integrated both perspectives, avoiding polarization and highlighting their shared goal of alleviating suffering. Why this reflection matters. This discussion illustrates how we respond to the tension between critique and belief. Noll's skepticism warns against blind faith, but the Buddha's teachings point to liberation beyond both systems and views. The younger participants' unhealthy response revealed the challenge of engaging deeply without dismissing subtle insights. The toxic response underscored the harm of creating unnecessary division. The elder woman's healthy critique brought clarity, and the monk's response showcased the potential for bridging seemingly opposing perspectives. By reflecting on these reactions, we can see how easy it is to act impulsively, whether through dismissal, division, or blind defense. The fourfold analysis encourages us to pause and reflect, fostering dialogue that transcends boundaries. Through such mindful reflection, even a challenging exchange becomes a fertile ground for growth and understanding. William C. Menninger versus the Buddha, the DSM-5 pioneer versus the teacher of the mind's true freedom. William C. Menninger, leading figure in the development of modern psychiatry and contributor to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, of mental disorders, DSM, focused on classifying and treating mental illness. He once observed, the human mind is as complex as it is fragile, requiring careful understanding. The Buddha, while deeply compassionate towards mental suffering, taught that true freedom comes not from classification, but from understanding the root causes of suffering. The mind is not healed by categorization, but by seeing clearly the causes of its suffering, craving, aversion, and ignorance. Quirk and scientific order. Menninger valued structure and systematic approaches to mental health, creating frameworks to help others navigate psychological challenges. The Buddha, too, created frameworks such as the Four Noble Truths, but always pointed beyond structure. Frameworks guide the mind, but freedom arises when one lets go of the framework itself. Were Menninger to ask, aren't classifications essential for understanding the mind? The Buddha might respond with a simile. Classifications are like maps. They guide, but liberation is found by walking the path, not studying the map. Attachment to structure and expertise. Menninger's reliance on systems reflects an attachment to human reason and the ability to diagnose. The Buddha, while valuing reason, revealed that true understanding lies beyond mental constructs. Expertise is valuable but limited. The wise abandon attachment to knowledge and rest in direct insight, while Menninger sought to heal through systematic care. The Buddha taught liberation through inner transformation. Healing is not found in systems alone, but in the mind free from clinging and ignorance. Sutta twist. The Buddha might reference the Vitaka Santana Sutta, which offers tools to calm the mind. When unwholesome thoughts arise, abandon them by cultivating their opposites. This way, the mind is calmed and directed towards freedom. As the conversation between Menninger and Buddha concluded, the observers gathered between the trees and began reflecting on what had transpired. Some sat on low stools, others stood or paced thoughtfully, while a few scribbled notes or adjusted their heads to shield their eyes from the afternoon sun. A wiry man with spectacles and a notebook stood, his voice sharp with critique. Menninger's reliance on classifications is essential. Without it, how can we make sense of mental health? The Buddha's rejection of categorization seems dangerous. This response, though firm, misrepresents the Buddha's teachings, suggesting they rejected all structure, when in reality they transcended it. It also clung to an absolutist view of psychiatry, failing to acknowledge the limitations of rigid frameworks. A middle-aged woman in a tailored coat leaned forward, her voice cutting. This is why spiritual teachings are useless, vague and impractical. Menninger builds something useful, but the Buddha just spouts poetry about maps and paths. How does that help? This toxic response insulted both the Buddha's wisdom and Menninger's contributions, fostering division between science and spirituality. It dismissed centuries of contemplative wisdom in favor of a narrow, utilitarian perspective. An elderly gentleman with a cane spoke calmly. Menninger's work brought clarity to mental health, like a map that guides the lost. But the Buddha reminds us not to mistake the map for the journey. Both perspectives are vital, one for orientation and the other for liberation. This healthy critique recognized Menninger's invaluable contributions while appreciating the Buddha's deeper insights into the impermanence of frameworks. It invited a synthesis of the two viewpoints rather than seeing them as opposing forces. Finally, a soft-spoken young woman seated cross-legged near the edge of the group shared her thoughts. Menninger's classifications provide a foundation for care. But the Buddhist teaching suggests that true healing comes when we move beyond labels and reach the heart of suffering itself. Perhaps they're not opposing views, but different steps on the same path. This was the healthiest response, bridging the two perspectives and highlighting how Menninger's systematic approach and the Buddha's transformative insights could complement each other. It avoided polarization and encouraged mutual understanding. Why this reflection matters. This discussion underscores the challenge of reconciling a structured approach to mental health with transformative spiritual insights. Menninger's work represents the human need for order and categorization, while the Buddha's teachings offer a way to transcend these boundaries and find true freedom. The wiry man's unhealthy critique revealed an attachment to structure, misinterpreting the Buddha's perspective as dismissive. The woman's toxic response illustrated the harm of creating unnecessary division and dismissing spirituality's practical relevance. The elderly gentleman's healthy critique acknowledged the value of both approaches, while the young woman's response invited integration and collaboration. Through this reflection, the fourfold analysis highlights how biases and attachments shape our understanding. By embracing mindfulness and balanced critique, we can transform challenging conversations into opportunities for deeper insight and connection. This way, we honor both maps that guide us and the paths that lead to freedom. This comparison highlights Menninger's focus on mental health systems and the Buddha's path to freedom, to direct insight into the mind's nature. Next, I'll move to Gollum from Lord of the Rings and Jason and the Argonauts. Gollum and Jason versus the Buddha, the obsessed seeker and the ambitious hero versus the teacher of freedom beyond craving. Facts and background. Gollum, from J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings, embodies the torment of obsession, his life consumed by his precious ring. Jason, the Greek mythological hero, led the Argonauts in their quest for the Golden Fleece, symbolizing ambition and perseverance. Both are seekers driven by desire. One tragically consumed, the other pursuing glory. Contrast in seeking and surrender. Gollum hisses, "We needs it, precious. We needs it to be whole." Jason stands tall, declaring, "The fleece was not obsession. It was a prize to unite kingdoms." The Buddha looks at them both and says, "Both craving and ambition bind the heart. Whether for a ring or a fleece, the grasping hand finds no peace." Quirk and singular focus. Gollum twists his body, his voice alternating between his pitiful and cunning tones. "We hate him, precious. The strong one stealing treasures." Jason, unimpressed, responds, "Stealing? I fought harpies and dragons. What battles have you fought?" The Buddha interjects with a story. A man carried a jug of water across a parched land, yet it leaked drop by drop. His thirst was never quenched. He fought the desert, but his true foe was his grasping hand. Attachment to treasures and goals. Gollum clings to his obsession, his eyes darting around nervously. "It is ours, precious. No one takes it." Jason, proud, says, "My treasure was earned. It brought unity to my people." The Buddha turns to the audience, where Menninger scribbles on a notepad and murmurs, "Unresolved trauma. Classic attachment behaviors." Van Morrison taps his guitar and comments, "Sounds like these guys need a chill song or two." The Buddha smiles faintly and says, "A heart weighed by treasures, earned or stolen, finds no rest. Let go, and you will carry nothing but peace." Sutta twist. The Buddha quotes the Adita Sutta, SN 35.28. The air is burning. Forms are burning. Consciousness is burning. Burning with what? With craving, aversion, and ignorance. Seeing this, the wise abandon attachment and find freedom. The audience reaction. Ajax grumbles, "Fighting dragons for a fleece? This is the hero we're listening to?" A woman with earbuds whispers to Noll, "Dragons? Rings? It sounds like a video game." Noll replies, "Or a psychiatric case study, more like." This encounter weaves Gollum's obsession and Jason's ambition into the Buddha's teachings on craving and attachment. Gollum and Jason versus the Buddha. The group discussion. Setting the scene. As the tension between Gollum's obsession and Jason's ambition faded, the audience, a mix of ancient and modern figures, began murmuring amongst themselves. The core group, Menninger, Van Morrison, Ajax, and Demeter, exchanged knowing glances before joining the discussion. Others lingered at the edges, their reactions a blend of curiosity and critique. Unhealthily critiquing, Ajax, always quick to judge, scoffed. What kind of hero can't let go of a trinket? Gollum's whining about his precious while Jason's whining about glory. Neither of them has the spine to just move on. Van Morrison smirked, strumming a lazy chord on his guitar. Says the guy who's still stuck on honor. Remind me, Ajax, how's holding on to pride working out for you? Toxic response. Gollum, crouched on a rock nearby, hissed. Move on, move on. Easy for them to say yes. But the precious, it calls to us, whispers sweet promises. We cannot let it go. Jason, leaning on his sword, retorted with a smirk. And yet, you've done nothing but chase shadows. At least I fought dragons and built something real. Your precious isn't worth a dirt under my boots. Healthier critiquing, Menninger, adjusting his glasses, broke in with a clinical tone. Both of you show classic signs of attachment trauma. Gollum is consumed by his fixation, unable to imagine life without his precious. Jason, on the other hand, externalizes his worth, tying his identity entirely to his achievements. Demeter nodded softly, her gaze distant. It's not just them. Grief and obsession cling to all of us in different ways. And the tighter we hold, the more we lose. Healthier responding, the Buddha, silent until now, spoke with quiet authority. Attachment wears many faces, obsession, ambition, even grief. The wise do not condemn these faces, but recognize them for what they are, fleeting shadows cast by the light of craving. He continued with the teaching. Craving binds the heart, whether for a ring or for a fleece, for pride or love. The mind unbound by craving rests in peace, untouched by shadows. Van Morrison, playing a gentle melody, mused, shadows or light. It's all part of the tune, isn't it? But I guess it's the silence after the song that really matters. Yeah. Jason, though reluctant, muttered, maybe peace is worth more than glory after all, but I'm not ready to drop the sword just yet. Closing reflections. The Buddha quoted the Adita Sutta, SN 35.28. The air is burning, forms are burning, consciousness is burning. Burning with what? With craving, aversion, and ignorance. Seeing this, the wise abandon attachment and find freedom. Gollum rocked backwards and forwards, whispering, burning, burning. The precious burns us, but we need it. Demeter placed a hand gently on Gollum's shoulder. You don't need it, little one. Not really. The audience grew quiet, the sound of Van's guitar fading into the stillness. Next, Van Morrison and Ajax, they get more curious. They go up for a close one-to-one talk with the Buddha. Van Morrison and Ajax versus the Buddha, the soulful seeker and the grumpy warrior. versus the teacher of harmony beyond extremes. Facts and background. Van Morrison, the singer-songwriter known for his introspective and spiritual music, often explores longing and transcendence in works like Astral Weeks. Ajax, a Greek warrior from Homer's Iliad, represents brute strength and unyielding pride. Both express intensity in their pursuits. Van through song and emotion, Ajax through battle and glory. Contrast in intensity and peace. Van strums his guitar, softly singing, "If I ventured in the slipstream." Ajax interrupts with a scoff. "Words are weak. Real strength lies in deeds, not laments." Van responds, "You fight battles. I fight the blues. Who's to say which is harder?" The Buddha interjects, "The song sung with wisdom can soothe 1,000 hearts, but the battle worth fighting is against one's own anger and pride." Quirk and fiery temper, Ajax bristles, gripping his spear. "I do not need a lesson from a minstrel or a monk. My path is strength." Van chuckles, "And what strength without rhythm, man? Even the strongest warrior needs a beat to march to." The Buddha gestures to the horizon and says, "The storm and the melody both pass, but the sky remains unshaken. Seek the sky within." Attachment to identity and extremes, Ajax, locked in his identity as a warrior, growls, "Peace is for the weak. A warrior must endure." Van, defensive, mutters, "Easy to say when you're not carrying your pain in a song." The Buddha smiles gently and shares a metaphor. A bow drawn too tight will snap, and one left slack cannot fire. Balance is the key, not strength alone, not song alone, but the harmony of the steady hand. Sutta twist, the Buddha quotes the Dhammapada 103. "Though one may conquer 1,000 men in battle, the greatest conqueror is the one who conquers themselves." The audience reaction. Menninger, adjusting his glasses, murmurs, "Ajax could benefit from anger management." And perhaps Van needs to explore mindfulness therapy. Jason, leaning on his sword, says, "At least Ajax isn't singing. We had enough of that with Gollum earlier on." A young woman with trainers and a notepad scribbles, "The bow metaphor, note to self for yoga classes." Van Morrison's soulful introspection and Ajax's brute force offering insights on balance and inner harmony. Van Morrison and Ajax versus the Buddha. The group discussion. Setting the scene, Van Morrison leaned back against a tree, his guitar resting loosely on his lap, while Ajax paced, his armor clanking with each step. The energy in the clearing was charged. Van's calm but cryptic musings clashed with Ajax's fiery pride. The audience sat nearby. A curious mix of sandals, quills, trainers, and notebooks, as they prepared to dissect the encounter. Unhealthily critiquing, Jason, ever the ambitious hero, smirked as he watched Ajax's pacing. Glory in music. Ajax here is barking louder than his bite. And Van, he's just hiding his fear of failure and pretty tunes. Van plucked a string, raising an eyebrow. At least I'm not charging at windmills, chasing some golden prize like it's going to fill that void. Ajax stopped and glared. Say that to my face, minstrel. The toxic responding, Gollum, crouched on a nearby rock, hissed. Yes, yes, the loud one and the singing one both think they're so precious, but neither knows what they really want. Just noise, just nothing. Ajax growled, gripping his spear. At least I fought battles that mattered. What's your contribution, little creature? Muttering in the shadows? Morrison shrugged, murmuring to himself, a bit ironic, coming from someone who can't let go of his spear long enough to see his own reflection. Healthier critiquing, Menninger, his notebook balanced on his knee. Ajax is clearly locked in a pattern of overcompensation. His identity is entirely enmeshed with his role as a warrior. You take that away, and he has no sense of self. Van, meanwhile, deflects with humor and art, but there's a reluctance to engage with deeper truths beneath his surface calm. Demeter, her hands resting on a basket of wheat, nodded thoughtfully. Both are clinging, both in different ways. Ajax to pride, Van to distraction. Balance isn't something either of them seems ready to embrace. Healthier responding, the Buddha, observing silently, spoke softly. Strength and song are both expressions of the heart, but when they are clung to, they become chains instead of wings. The warrior fears weakness, the musician fears stillness. Both fears bind the heart. He turned to Ajax. You carry your strength like a shield, but it also burdens you. What happens when you set it down? To Van Morrison, he said. Your music soothes, but it also hides. What happens when the song ends? The closing reflection. The Buddha continued, his voice calmly and resolutely soothing. Strength fades, songs fade, but the heart unbound finds peace beyond action and sound. Like a bow that is neither too tight nor too slack, balance frees the mind from suffering. He quoted the Dhammapada 103. Though one may conquer 1,000 men in battle, the greatest conqueror is the one who conquers themselves. Van strummed a quiet chord and murmured, Guess the silence after the song. Yeah, I think he's got a point there, yeah. Ajax, after a long pause, loosened his grip on his spear. Maybe the shield does get heavy after a while, he muttered, though his voice carried more defiance than acceptance. Jason, breaking the moment, grinned. So, What happens if you don't have strength or a song? Asking for a friend here, not for me. Van Morrison chuckled. You probably just wander around making snide comments, Jason. The group fell into a reflective silence as the Buddha's words settled, each carrying their own private thoughts of strength, stillness, and letting go. Next, I'll be moving to the time when Hercules and Homer stood up and both went to talk close to the Buddha. Hercules and Homer versus the Buddha. The mighty hero and the epic poet versus the teacher of stories beyond strength. Facts and background. Hercules, the demigod of Greek mythology, is renowned for completing the 12 labors, feats of superhuman strength and endurance that symbolize the triumph over impossible odds. Homer, the ancient Greek storyteller, credited with the Iliad and the Odyssey, immortalized heroes like Hercules through his epic poetry, shaping Western ideas of heroism and legacy. Together, they represent strength and storytelling, one through deeds, the other through words. Contrast in legacy and liberation. Hercules flexes his arms, grinning. 12 labors, and not a single dragon or anything bested me. Homer, tapping his quill on his scroll, responds dryly, yes, and without poets like me, who would know your name? Hercules fires back. Glory isn't written, it's earned. The Buddha interjects. Glory fades, whether in deeds or in words. True peace is found not in legacy, but in the freedom of the heart, unbound by the need for either. Quirk and creative tension. Homer leans forward and intrigued, but isn't storytelling an act of liberation? Buddha, words create worlds. Hercules, scoffing, adds, worlds, words. I built my glory with my hands, not a pen. The Buddha responds with a parable. A man built a bridge with stones. Another drew it on parchment. The river flows on, indifferent to either. The wise see the river and cross it, letting both stone and ink fade. Attachment to strength and narrative. Hercules, still smirking, says, strength is eternal. Who could let go of that? Homer counters, and what of words, Buddha? Do they not give life to wisdom? The Buddha pauses, then gestures to a ballpoint pen on the pad in front of a guest. A pen can write poetry or cause harm, but it cannot hold truth. Truth is lived, not told. Strength and words are tools, useful, yet impermanent. Sutta twist. The Buddha quotes the Majjhima Nikaya 22, parable of the raft. A raft is meant for crossing, not for holding on to. So too are stories and deeds. They guide, but must be left behind. The audience reaction. Van Morrison hums softly. A river flows on, like a song. Ajax mutters. Strength fades. I like to see the Buddha arm wrestle Hercules. A young man with headphones scribbles, "Stone, ink, river. It's a metaphor overload. Perfect for my podcast." Group discussion. Setting the scene. The clearing was quieter now, save for the steady rhythm of Hercules' lion and Homer tapping his quill against a blank scroll. Hercules, confident and commanding, outspoken of deeds, while Homer, with his dry wit, countered with the enduring power of words. The audience, a mix of ancient and modern figures, began to stir with their own observations, adding color to the unfolding narrative. Unhealthily critiquing, Ajax, still brooding from his earlier exchange, snorted, "Hercules is all brawn, no brains. And Homer is just piggybacking of other people's glory. Strength fades. Stories, well, they're just air." Jason, leaning lazily on his sword, added, "At least Hercules did something. Homer's whole career is scribbling about other people's adventures. Some hero." Toxic responding, Homer, raising an eyebrow, retorted, "Without my words, Jason, no one would even remember your golden fleece and Ajax. Perhaps you should write something down before your rage erases you entirely." Hercules, unimpressed, crossed his arms. "Words don't slay hydras, actions do. And no amount of ink will make you strong enough to lift a lion, poet." From a shadowy corner, Gollum hissed softly, "Precious words, precious strength, yes. But what do they bring us? Nothing, nothing." Healthier critiquing, Dr. Menninger, ever the psychiatric clinic observer, adjusted his notes and his glasses and spoke. "Hercules is clearly enmeshed with his physical achievements. His sense of self is tied directly to his feats. Meanwhile, Homer demonstrates an intellectual fixation, deriving his identity almost entirely from his storytelling. Both are locked into narrow views of their worth." Demeter, the Greek goddess of agriculture, resting her hand on her basket, added gently, "Strength builds the house, and stories keep it alive. But if either is clung to, the house crumbles when the storm comes. Balance isn't in one or the other. It's in seeing beyond them both." A healthier responding, the Buddha, who had been listening patiently, finally spoke, his voice calm yet resonant. "To Hercules, I say, your strength is remarkable. But when you carry it as a burden, it binds you. What happens to strength when it no longer serves?" He turned to Homer. "Your stories inspire, but inspiration is fleeting. What happens to wisdom when the pen is still?" Hercules furrowed his brow. "Without strength, there is nothing left. A weak Hercules isn't Hercules at all." Homer mused aloud, "And without stories, perhaps
wisdom falls silent and forgotten. Buddha smiled faintly and offered a teaching. The river flows, strong and deep, yet it does not cling to its banks. Strength and stories are like the river's current. They serve, but they are not the whole. The wise let go of the river's pool and see the ocean beyond. A closing reflection. The Buddha continued, quoting the Majjhima Nikaya 22 parable of the raft. A raft is meant for crossing, not for holding on to. So too are stories and deeds. They guide, but they must be left behind to reach freedom. Van Morrison, sitting nearby, strummed his guitar and murmured, "Strength fades, words fade, but that river thing, yeah, that sticks, yeah, nice." Ajax, smirking, said, "A strong river could have taken down Troy." Dr. Menninger jotted a note. The Buddha's parable suggests detachment, but it's clear that both Hercules and Homer struggle to envisage worth without their respective attachments. Classic identity entrenchment. Demeter, the Greek goddess of agriculture, nodded, her voice soft. Perhaps that's the point, to see beyond what we think defines us. Jason leaned forward, teasing. So, what's stronger, Herc? Your strength or a poet's pen? Hercules glared. The lion I left wouldn't care about the pen. Homer, without missing a beat, replied, the lion would be forgotten without me. The Buddha's smile lingered. The group softened, giving way to quiet reflection. Next, we'll look at the point where Demeter, goddess of agriculture, joins up with Saint Michael, fighter of evil, to talk with the Buddha. Demeter and Saint Michael versus the Buddha, the Earth Mother and the angelic warrior versus the teacher of peace beyond duality. Narrative introduction. Demeter stood at the edge of the gathering, her hands still stained with soil, the basket of wheat resting on her hip. The lines on her face bore the grief of the lifetimes, yet her eyes retained a fierce determination. Beside her, Saint Michael loomed, his sword shimmering faintly, pristine and otherworldly. The contrast was striking. Demeter, rooted in the cycles of earth and loss. Michael, the celestial figure of unwavering divine justice. Do you ever tire? Demeter asked, not looking at her. Always standing guard, always ready to fight. Michael turned. His expression impassive. The weak depend on the strong. Without vigilance, chaos prevails. Demeter chuckled softly, and yet, for all your strength, do you bring back the lost? My vigilance could not return my Persephone from the underworld. Justice seems cold comfort. Dialogue unfolds. Justice is not comfort, it is balance. I fight to uphold it, whether or not it consoles.
And yet, Demeter countered, her voice sharper. Justice does not fill the emptiness left by love. Before Michael could reply, the Buddha stepped forward, his presence quiet yet commanding. He spoke gently, his words cutting through their tension. Justice and love, both are noble, but both bind the heart when clung to. The mother grieves for her child, and the warrior battles his foes, yet both suffer because they hold too tightly to what is beyond their control. Demeter frowned, clutching her basket. But what is love if not holding on? Without it, what remains? Michael added, and without justice, what meaning does life have? The Buddha gestured to a grain of wheat in Demeter's basket. The seed grows, ripens, and falls to the earth, yet life continues. Love and justice are like the seed. They nourish, but they too must be let go. The group breakout, as the conversation settled, the audience stirred. 4 figures, each reflecting a facet of the debate, began to share their thoughts. Van Morrison, leaning back against a tree, strummed his guitar thoughtfully. Love and justice. Sounds like a good song title. But seriously, Demeter's got a point. What's life without the deep stuff? Isn't holding on the whole reason we create art? Jason, his sword resting across his lap, smirked. And what's life without a fight? Michael's right. If you're not standing for something, you're just wandering around like him. He nodded towards Gollum, who sat muttering nearby. Menninger, notebook in hand, frowned as he wrote. Demeter's grief is understandable but obsessive. Her attachment keeps her from moving forward. Michael, on the other hand, shows signs of rigidity. His moral framework leaves no room for nuance. Both could benefit from more balance. Demeter turned her head, her face softening for a moment. As she listened, balance, she murmured. It sounds so simple when you say it. The Buddha smiled faintly. Balance is not found in simplicity or complexity. It is found in the stillness beyond extremes. Gollum, crouched on the nearby rock, hissed softly, balance is tricksy. We tries it, precious, but it slips away. Deeper reflection. The Buddha addressed the group as a whole. Grief and duty, love and justice, these are the stories you tell yourselves to make sense of life. But they are not the whole of life. The wise see beyond the stories, resting in the truth that all things arise and pass. He then quoted the Sallatha Sutta, SN 36.6. The first arrow is pain. The second arrow is grief and clinging. The wise endure the first, but abandon the second, freeing the heart from sorrow. Demeter nodded slowly, tears welling in her eyes.
but not falling. St. Michael's hand tightened on his sword before he released it, letting it hang loosely at his side. Van Morrison, plucking a chord on his guitar, said softly, "Still think love makes a better song." Yeah. So, this is the final part of the episode, 51. This episode brought together a diverse array of figures, from the celestial resolve of St. Michael to the introspective artistry of Van Morrison, the boundless strength of Hercules, the storytelling brilliance of Homer, and the nurturing complexity of Demeter, alongside Jason's heroic quests, Gollum's tragic obsessions, and the structured reasoning of minds like William C. Menninger, Kraepelin, and Richard Noll. Each dialogue with the Buddha revealed new dimensions of human struggle, aspiration, and freedom. Through their encounters, we've seen how the Buddha's teachings of letting go, mindfulness, and liberation transcend time and culture, offering a counterbalance to ambition, pride, and attachment. The Fourfold critique provided a chance to reflect more deeply, moving beyond simple agreement or rejection, inviting us to engage with the nuance of each conversation. As this episode ends, let us carry forward the questions raised. What drives our actions? How do we handle our attachments? And how can we find peace in a world filled with complexity? Thank you for watching. Until the next episode, may your journey be one of understanding and freedom.